All right, guys, Jeremy Knauff here with another episode of the Public Relations Declassified live stream. For some reason, we seem to be having a little bit of a technical glitch here. A little background stuff is not moving, but all good. That does not change anything for us. We're going to be breaking down a topic today that will help you get your pitches to be more effective. And basically what we're going to be covering is, man, everything is just moving super, super slow today. How to write an opening line that makes journalists read your pitch. Now, this is very important because just sending the pitch, I think most people think that, oh, well, if I send this, it's a journalist's job to read it, so they're just going to read it. I promise you, most of your pitches are going to be ignored, and in many cases, flat out deleted, because journalists are absolutely buried with emails. So you have just a couple of seconds to hook their attention in order to get them interested enough to continue reading through your pitch. Now, before we jump into the meat and potatoes of this particular episode, I also want to touch on a topic that a lot of you guys have seen in the news. It's a fun little PR crisis that has been quite entertaining to me, and that is the Taco Bell PR crisis. You guys have probably seen some of the news about the contaminated lettuce that has caused all kinds of problems. Explosive diarrhea is how the media has framed it. The CDC chimed in on it as well. And as a result of this, in-store traffic at all of the Taco Bells has plunged by nearly 19% below average for this particular time period, right? Now, there are a few elements of this that I want to touch on. One is how they've handled it, how they are handling it. And two is what they should have done differently. So bottom line, this is a shitty situation. Pun 100% intended, by the way. They did not do a good job of getting ahead of this. And this is the kind of thing you definitely don't want to be standing behind, right? So they dropped the ball in a lot of ways, and there's not really a lot you can do to make the problem go away, but there are some things you can do to mitigate the long-term damage from it. So let's talk about what they should have done differently. So the first is, if I was managing a crisis like this, I would advise them to lean in and make some noise, right? Take control of the narrative. And there's always been this kind of joke for as long as I can remember that if you're going to Taco Bell, you're coming home with diarrhea regardless, right? And this was long before this particular outbreak. Excuse me. So, it's kind of that whole, were you ever really a fan if you're going to let diarrhea steer you away from Taco Bell? I think a good approach here is to embrace humor. They haven't really done that. They haven't really said a lot, to be honest with you. And there's the old mantra, right? Laughter is the best medicine. Maybe not when you've got diarrhea, but in general, laughter tends to make a lot of things a lot less negative. So there's a lot of benefit to potentially using humor in the approach to all of this. There's definitely some wordplay they could run with. The old tagline, for those of you who are a little bit older, you may remember their tagline at one point was "Run for the border." Right? There's a lot of fun wordplay you could do with that to just kind of make light of the situation. Something else that they could do is engage with Wendy's. Wendy's social media accounts, the hamburger place, they are just amazing. They have mastered the art of social media and trolling people, and they've used it to generate a ton of exposure and goodwill for the company. So if Taco Bell and Wendy's kind of got in a little bit of back and forth, there could be a lot of fun, and it could kind of get people talking more about that and less about the explosive diarrhea situation. So I think that would be a good move. Another thing that they should definitely do is encourage UGC, or user-generated content, talking about the brand, and not in the sense of minimizing the current situation or trying to hide it or cover it up. I, in fact, would say lean into it, embrace it. So, one of the things I would recommend is roll with a hashtag like "still worth it," right? And just kind of make light of the situation. And then another really good tactic would be to create some social media trends. Some of you guys have seen the little Netflix documentary trend that Trish and I were going back and forth on last week or so. There's a lot of different types of trends, and people tend to jump on them, and it creates a lot of exposure for certain brands if it's executed well. So some of the things that Taco Bell could do would be, so like one idea might be restroom selfies. Obviously you want to keep the certain elements out of the photos, but that could be a lot of fun. It could be hilarious. The more ridiculous, the better. Another trend could be the longest 10-minute drive home. So maybe somebody's just driving around in their car and they record part of their drive and then speed it up and, to a absurd kind of comical speed. And, basically you just got that video and the little, still worth it has as a hashtag on the screen, and maybe have, the longest 10-minute drive home after Taco Bell, something like that. Taco Bell survival kit could be another fun one. So for the folks who are kind of familiar with the firearms community, there's a trend that goes around from time to time where they'll post their EDC setup, right? Their everyday carry, the weapon, the knife, the keys, the first aid kit, all the things. And it's kind of like laid out there, and they're kind of showing off what they carry. You could do a fun little trend of the Taco Bell survival kit where they're basically, maybe there's some toilet paper, some baby wipes, rubber gloves, a mask, whatever. You could do a really fun one with that National Geographic style, right? You guys have all seen the documentaries. Maybe the narrator voice comes on as the video is like recording somebody sitting in Taco Bell eating. Narrator voice comes on and says something like, here we observe the Taco Bell customer. And then as the camera kind of follows them around eating, the narrator says, they appear calm. And then suddenly the person gets up and walks towards the bathroom. And the narrator could say something like, the migration begins. And you could even take audio straight from a clip from National Geographic, or even better, if you guys have ever heard of Aussie Man, he is absolutely hilarious. He's this dude with this heavy, heavy Australian accent, super funny, super over the top and animated. Man, he could do something like this and turn it into a clip that everybody uses, an audio clip that everybody uses, and runs with this trend. Olympic speed walk is another one, right? You can just set up a camera and record yourself walking to the bathroom, whether it's in Taco Bell or at your home. But maybe if you do some of these trends, if you're, the Taco Bell marketing folks, and you do some of these trends, I would probably encourage your customers not to scroll social media while they're eating in Taco Bell, because I don't think we want people laughing too hard there under the circumstances. So look, the reality of this entire situation is this PR crisis created a scenario where a drop in business was inevitable. Maybe a few years ago, before Ozempic was a thing and people had to find kind of creative ways to lose weight, maybe this would have been no issue whatsoever. But the truth is, Taco Bell has been hit hard because of this. Not quite as hard as their toilets have been hit, but hard nonetheless. So this whole situation is just going to have to run its course, just like the diarrhea. But they need to embrace it in the same way that their customers are all embracing their toilet seats. Eventually, people are going to start going again. Well, in reality, they haven't stopped going, but we're talking about going into the restaurant itself. This is the kind of thing that, like I said, people have always joked about Taco Bell causing diarrhea. So once the issue itself goes away, once the contaminated lettuce is completely removed from the supply chain, and they no longer have that in the stores, people are going to start coming back to Taco Bell. It's not going to be a long-term issue, but they really should have leaned into this. They really should have used it to maximize exposure. People are going to make jokes about it either way, and there's not going to be a long-term impact. So I think it was a huge missed opportunity for them not to jump into this. And by the way, I did find a great video clip that would be hilarious for some of this social media content here. Let's see if it'll play properly. Yeah. So, yeah, basically, they should have leaned into this. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into the actual meat and potatoes of today's episode. And that is how to write an opening line, because this is the most important part of your pitch, or I take that back. The second most important, the subject line in the email is the most important. But after that, the opening line is the most important part, because that's what gets the journalist interested enough to continue reading. And if you can't get their attention, they'll probably take a quick scan, not very far, and then just delete it and move on. So we want to avoid that. So I like to make the opening sentence basically just a one sentence paragraph by itself. And then from there, you go into the other elements, which we've covered in some of the previous episodes, the various elements of the pitch. For today, we're only going to be talking about this opening hook. So there's a few different ways that we can do this. One is with breaking news. Now, I want to emphasize it has to actually be breaking news. And most news that people are trying to pitch is not actually breaking news, right? So your new book or an award that you've won or some new hire, that is not breaking news. Nobody gives a shit about that. What is breaking news would be some kind of significantly new technology, right? So no, your new CRM is not new technology. But if there's some kind of major, let's say AI can basically take over and completely manage your CRM, that might be breaking news. A cure for cancer would obviously be breaking news, or a new law that's about to get passed. All of these things would be examples of breaking news. So the general rule of thumb that I like to look at when it comes to breaking news is it's something that must affect a significant portion of their audience in a significant way. So I'll give you guys a good example of that. One of the topics that I've talked about from time to time in the past few years was the BOI, right? This corporate transparency bullshit law that the government was trying to implement. I don't know, it was like a year or two ago. Well, this has now resurfaced. And so a good example of an opening hook using breaking news, and of course, all of these are assuming that this hook is relevant to you and what you do. So my friend Carol Roth, a lot of you guys have heard of her, seen a bunch of her content, super smart, and one of the biggest champions of the small business community I've ever seen in my life. She was one of the most vocal advocates against this, and she was talking about it a lot. So, you know, if she was to pitch the media or have her team pitch the media for her, this BOI would be a great angle to go with, because it is something that's relevant to her, because she's talked about it a ton. She's done a ton of research, and she actively lobbied to get it repealed. Essentially what the BOI is, it's a law that you have to do all this extra crazy reporting about your company with the government, and the government never really bothered to tell business owners about it. They just were trying to implement it. And then there's like thousands and thousands of dollars in fines per day that you can get if you haven't filed properly, right? So it's something that would crush countless small businesses. And I think this was intentional, right? The government wanted to run small businesses out of business, essentially. So a good example of an opening hook using breaking news with this particular story would be Senator Sanders is yet again trying to sneak the anti-small business BOI law into healthcare bill. And now for context here, there was a healthcare bill that was being pushed through the legislatures, and he basically tried to attach this BOI thing to the healthcare bill, which frankly I think is bullshit. You should not be attaching different things to a bill. A bill should be one issue, period, and pass or fail on its merits. So that would be a good example of using breaking news in an opening hook. Overcoming basically insurmountable odds, right? Everyone loves a good hero's journey. They see themselves in the story. Most people love a feel-good story. And typically people will root for the underdog. But the other side of that coin is when you get big enough, then people tend to start to hate you, right? You've gone a little bit further than they think you should go. So just be aware of that. But there is a caveat here. You can't be in the middle of the journey. You can't be, you know, I lost everything and now I'm rebuilding. Nobody gives a shit. That doesn't mean anything. You have to have already rebuilt. You have to have already achieved something significant after the loss. That's what the hero's journey is. It's not, hey, I got knocked down and I'm still going. No, it's I got knocked down, I got back up, and I continued to move forward. And now here's what I've achieved as a result. So you have to be on the other side of whatever the challenge was. So a good example of that is one of my clients and friend, and someone you guys have seen, I think on the live streams, but also in some of the private Spartan community calls, is Tatiana Zagorsky. All right. Now she's an immigrant. She came over to America, became an entrepreneur, and had some really rough challenges along the way, and went on to become incredibly successful. She's now known as both a prominent real estate investor and an AI expert. So a good example of an opening hook using her overcoming odds story might be something like immigrant turned entrepreneur Tatiana Zagorsky defies odds to build a successful AI tech company, right? So this, like I said, this is just the opening hook. After this, you then go into the meat and potatoes of the pitch. Now, another approach is controversy. I love controversy because it gets people so damn worked up. And if you've seen any of my social media content, you know that I embrace the hell out of that shit. People love to hate and they love to gossip. So this tends to drive a ton of engagement. And that's something that journalists and the editors and producers behind the scenes love to see, because that means people are going to be coming to the comment section on the website, or they're going to come to the post on social media, and they're going to argue for or against that particular story. They're going to argue with each other. It's going to get shared by people who are talking about, hey, look at how amazing this is. Shared by people who are saying, hey, look at how stupid and terrible this is. And all of that is good. So if you can use controversy, man, journalists get very excited about that, because they are judged not just on the quality of their work, but also the engagement that it drives, because that leads to more revenue downstream, because they now have more visitors, more engagement, which means either more advertisers or advertisers that are willing to pay more. So they love this. So a good example of controversy, and this is something you see a ton in the political world, and the example we're going to use here today for this one is, in fact, a political one. A good opening hook for this might be that Dems nominate literal Nazi and sexual predator Plattner for state senate. And, you know, for a party that supposedly hates Nazis and they're going to punch Nazis whenever they see them, they certainly gave this guy a lot of latitude. And, well, we have to elect him because, you know, the alternative is a Republican, blah, blah, blah. So it's okay that he used to be a Nazi. It's okay that he's sexually assaulted multiple people, right? That's a good controversial topic. But it's also important. Let me touch back on this for a second. When you are using controversy, you can't have a blanket approach to your pitch. So if I was going to pitch this to Fox News or Newsmax, I might use this controversy, but framed one way. If I was going to pitch this same story to MSNBC, or I guess now it's called MS Now, or, you know, the Daily Beast or something like that, I would have to pitch the story in a very different way, still using controversy, but it would have to be framed differently. So just keep that in mind, the target audience, the target of your pitch. Both of those are two separate things, but very related. That's going to determine how you frame the controversy. Okay, so another strategy for your opening hook is an opportunity or a threat. People love to be in the know, right? Especially content creators, whether, you know, they're writing articles on a blog or in a news publication, whatever, or they're creating their own content, you know, videos, text posts, whatever. They love to be the person who's the first to talk about a thing, the person who's the first to share this information with other people. So there's two ways to look at the opportunity or the threat, right? What can people gain from this information, or what can they lose by not knowing this information? All right. So if we go back to Taco Bell, man, yeah, you can certainly lose a lot if you don't know about the lettuce thing, right? I didn't end up writing an example for this one, so I'm just going to kind of try and come up with something on the fly. If we jump back to the BOI thing that Carol was talking about, this would be a good way to look at the opportunity or a threat. I would generally frame this one as a threat, not as an opportunity. But the threat in this case would be if you don't know about this new regulation, this new law, and as a result, you don't properly file your business under the new regulations, then the problem you're going to have is an obscene amount of money that racks up cumulatively day by day by day. And I mean, in a very short period of time, you could be looking at a 5 or a 6-figure fine from the government and essentially having your business shut down. So that's a pretty damn big threat. If we talk about opportunities, let's say I'm actually helping Fox 13 put together a story related to data centers. So if we were to put something out there on that, a good way to frame that, and like I said, I'm just doing this on the fly, so the wording may be a little bit rough right now, but essentially pitching that story to the media as an opportunity, there's some things we could address, like the new jobs that it's going to create, the increased tax base that it's going to create, right? Because the government's going to tax the property of the data center. It's going to tax, in some cases, depending on what state you're in, it may tax a portion of the revenue. Like Florida, for example, does not have an income tax, whereas a place like New York does. But you have to look at where the opportunities are. And it's not so much a matter of, it's not about the opportunities for you. It's a matter of the opportunities for the audience. Same applies for the threat, right? So if we're looking at this from the perspective of opportunities, well, from the audience perspective, there's more jobs. There's more tax revenue that supports the local schools and community resources and all this stuff, right? So frame it that way. And this could be a really powerful strategy. And then the last one we're going to touch on today is one that I talk about a lot. I love this strategy, and it's called, I call it anyway, a startling statistic. Now, statistics register in our brains in a very powerful way. Typically, it draws people in to learn more. And the reason for that is because it's essentially an unfinished statement. If I tell you that, 74% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years, well, now you're like, okay, but why? That gets you intrigued. That gets you wanting to know more. So this can be a really good way to get the journalist's attention and get them reading deeper into your pitch. This registers instant context. They understand exactly what the situation is about. They don't know all the details. They don't know how it plays out, but they understand the context instantly because of that statistic. And people tend to have a very hard time really contextualizing statistics, right? People, for the most part, people suck at math. So because they don't understand certain things, statistics can make things appear much more dramatic if you know how to use them properly. And you see this a lot in politics. You see this a lot in, you can see it in science. If I tell you, let's say, for example, if we're talking politics, if I say, oh, well, the murder rate went up by 73%, that sounds horrifying, right? A 73% increase in murder rates sounds like a damn apocalypse. But what if there was only, 2 murders last year? Well, that means essentially that there was 1 more murder this year, right? The statistic and the reality are very detached. So this is what I mean when I say that people don't quite understand statistics quite as well as they think they do. And it's also a good part of why this can be so effective. Now, the cool thing about startling statistics is you can actually tie this to any other opening hook strategy that we've talked about. So if we go back to the BOI, a good opening hook might be tied to, 74% of business owners don't know about this new filing requirement that could lead to $30,000 in fines, right? Like, so something like that, you're now tying breaking news with a startling statistic, and it becomes even more powerful. Now, the key here is specificity. You have to be very clear and articulate a very, very specific point. So we've got a good example for this one This was something we put together for one of our clients who's in the credit card business. And a good opening hook for them would be that the percentage of, and this is based on Startling statistic, the percentage of credit card balances 90 days plus delinquent hit 13.12%, the highest level in 15 years. Now that's an outrageous statistic because we are now facing the highest credit card delinquency that we've ever seen in 15 years. That's a pretty crazy number. And that's the kind of thing that's going to get a journalist very curious about the rest of your pitch. So these are some of the opening hooks that we've used in our agency. We consistently use them because the key is it doesn't matter how good your pitch is if nobody actually reads it. So you have to get them interested enough, intrigued enough that they're going to sit down and they're going to read or at least scan through the rest of your pitch to see if there's anything that they want to cover there. So leverage this to your benefit. You want to get them intrigued. You want to get them interested so that they actually go through and read the rest. And that's going to exponentially increase the likelihood that what you're pitching turns into a media story. Now, the other thing to think about here is the more often that you do this, now, A, you're going to get a lot better, but B, they'll get used to seeing your name in their inbox. They'll get used to seeing you share stuff that other people aren't sharing with them, and they'll start to see you as a resource. So you may not get results right out of the gate, but if you consistently do this and you consistently apply the principles like this and the other things that I talk about all the time, you're going to see infinitely better results. You're going to see far more media features than if you just kind of wing it and just send the typical TDLR, boring, bland, useless pitch. So that's going to give us a segue into Jeremy's PR PSA, which is that journalists are buried with emails. So your pitch has to hook their attention in the first sentence, or they're going to simply delete it and move on. This is something that most people don't think about. They think about how great they wrote that pitch. They think about all the amazing information in it and how valuable they feel that it is. They think that somebody's sitting on the other side of that computer just waiting for their email to come in so they can sit there and read every word of it. That is not the case. All right. Journalists are incredibly busy. They're buried with emails. They're crushed by deadlines, and things are far more chaotic in that industry than most people realize. So if you can't hook their attention right out of the gate, your pitch is likely going to be ignored and you're going to get no results out of it. So leverage these 5 strategies for hooking their attention, and I promise you that you're going to see far better results. Okay, guys, that's going to be a wrap for today. If you got something valuable out of this, I would love it if you drop us a comment on YouTube. If there's someone you think would benefit from this, please share this with them. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.